All right, we're going to begin here with slide number 19. We're going to talk about the four core values of America: liberty, individualism, equality, and self-government. I want you to think this through. As we talk about all this, there's a discussion post question actually next week about which of these core political ideals of America is the most important and why. So, and all of them are significant. All of them are very important. I'd just be curious to hear your take on what you think is the most important and give me some good reasons, okay? So if you go to slide number 20, one key value of America is obviously liberty, right? When you think of America, you think of freedom. Let freedom ring, right? The Liberty Bell, things of that nature. The principle that individuals should be free to act and think as they choose, provided they do not infringe unreasonably on the freedom and well-being of others. Okay, what happens if there's not enough freedom? Well, obviously you've got a, Orwellian 1984 Big Brother's watching you, and government is controlling everything. Are we there as Americans? No. But as we're going to talk about later, there's lots that have gone on after 2000. The September 11th attacks, right? Is that it's been found that the NSA is surveilling every one of our emails, every one of your text messages, websites you're going to, all that kind of stuff. It was revealed that that's what they're doing, okay? So we are more of a surveillance state than we've ever been, okay? Is that troubling to you? I don't know. I personally got some big problems in the fact that the government may surveil everything I do or say without my permission. To me, it would be a violation of the Fourth Amendment, prohibition against illegal searches and seizures. But again, we can have that conversation later on in the chapter on civil rights and civil liberties. What happens when there's too much freedom, or is this possible? Okay. Probably a good example of, again, too much freedom, I've already hinted at that, is if there's a complete breakdown of government in some way, shape, or form. Okay, think of a city where there's looting and there's a riot. Think of what happened in Iraq in 2011 after President Obama pulled all of our troops out. Okay, there was what they call a power vacuum. Okay, where there was no order at all in that region of the world. And what happened? You had the rise of ISIS. You had kind of these super terrorist groups rising up. So in other words, if there's a complete absence of government, and again, all of you probably have your opinions on government, and I'm sure all of you have a story you could probably tell me about perhaps your frustration with government in some way, shape, or form. But you don't want to have a complete absence of government because that could lead to some form of anarchy and some form of chaos. Okay, so you've got to, the key is trying to preserve the right balance. Again, think of the principle of ordered liberty, which is what our Constitution sought to create and foster when it was written in 1787. If you go to slide number 21, this is a quote from one of my favorite books of all time called A Free People's Suicide by Os Guinness. Again, he talks about this paradox of freedom. One of the greatest paradoxes of freedom is one of the greatest enemies of freedom is freedom, right? Too much freedom can actually lead to our own destruction. We can actually get to a place where we can be imprisoned by our own desires. Okay, so here's a quote. I love this. Freedom always faces a fundamental moral challenge. Freedom requires order and therefore restraint. Yet the only restraint that does not contradict freedom is self-restraint, which is the very thing that freedom undermines when it flourishes. Thus, the heart of the problem of freedom is the problem of the heart, because free societies are characterized by restlessness at their core. So what's he saying here is that freedom, in order to flourish, must have some form of order. And the absence of it, it'll collapse, okay? Just take something simple like your health, okay? I can be free to do whatever I want. I'm an American. I'm free to do whatever I want. Okay, fine. Eat whatever you want. Eat as much as you want without any restraint, and do this over time, okay? Not just a period of days, but let's just try weeks and months and years. What's going to happen to your health freedom? Okay, your health freedom is most likely going to be deteriorated, okay? As someone who's in his 50s, okay? The pizzas you wailed on at the age of 18, Okay, when you reach the age of 25, 30, they'll start wailing back on you. Okay, you can't just keep, cranking on pizzas, at 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night, because I guarantee you're going to deal with some weight issues and all that fun stuff, okay? Trust me, I've been there. Again, I remember I told you the price of a flat stomach for someone my age is two things. Number one, running 25 to 30 miles a week, and number two, bouts with and friendship with Weight Watchers, okay? But again, you can do whatever you want. You can be free to do whatever you want, but the problem is there are consequences. You cannot sidestep the consequences, and that's what he's talking about, is that freedom requires order and they're restraint in order to be, again, just take health freedom, okay? But the only restraint that does not contradict freedom is self-restraint, which is the very thing that freedom undermines when it flourishes. In other words, the more freedom you get, I'm just going to keep eating whatever I want, eating more of what I want. Guess what's happening? I'm free to do whatever I want, and I'm eating more, and I'm eating more, and I'm eating more, and guess what's happening? Okay? You're losing your own self-restraint in the process. Again, maybe a poor example, we can think of all kinds of other examples. There's all kinds of other addictions and things out there in America. Again, one of the great ironies of America in reflecting on this quote, America is the freest nation in the world, and yet we've got the most addictions out of any nation in the world, which begs the question, how free are we really? So that's, again, if you understand what he's saying here is freedom requires order and some form of restraint. And that's what that's what the founders of America were trying to establish, because they realized that unbridled, unchecked freedom can actually lead to a people's destruction. Okay, so how do they propose to set it out? If you go to slide number 22, this is what is called the golden triangle of freedom. Okay, Alexis de Tocqueville, in his book Democracy in America, which we'll discuss a little bit later, but he wrote a book in the 1830s trying to look at what made America America, what made our system of government so great, what made our society so great, and he called it the habits of the heart, or we could call it the golden triangle of freedom. In other words, you've got to have certain habits to foster freedom. Okay, so freedom, in order to flourish, requires virtue, requires some form of moral, ethical constraints, okay? There's got to be some form of constraint. There's got to be some form of self-control within the people. You've got to have that, okay? So freedom requires virtue, and then virtue in turn, okay, well, how do you know what's good? How do you know what's moral? How do you know what's virtuous, okay? It comes from some form of faith, okay? America at its founding, it was the Judeo-Christian faith that fostered the virtue that made the republic that was America, okay? The founders recognized you could have all kinds of different faiths, okay, but there's got to be some faith that sustains really, really good, proper morality, and they felt that the Judeo-Christian worldview did it, okay? Is today in America do we still have that same thinking today? Not so much, okay? But again, we're thinking through what causes liberty to last for all time. The founders were always thinking, we don't just want liberty to flourish in our generation. We want liberty to flourish 50 years from now, 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now, thousands of years from now, because republics and democracies historically never lasted beyond a generation or maybe a couple of hundred years in the case of the Roman Republic. But what they were trying to establish in America was something that would last for all time, okay? So freedom, you must be virtuous, okay? You must have some form of self-control, and self-control is fostered by faith. You cannot suppress religion. You cannot get rid of religion in the public square. You must have something that fosters self-control and good values and morals, okay? It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen within secularism. You've got to have something that informs that. But faith, okay, religious liberty, it only flourishes if it has the freedom to flourish. So it's like this triangle, think of a recycling triangle that just keeps repeating ad infinitum. Freedom requires virtue, which in turn requires faith, which in turn requires freedom, okay? Again, take the athletic analogy. I want to be free to run a 5-minute mile, okay? Then it's going to take submission to the virtue of self-control. running every day, running sprints, running long distance, watching what I eat, reducing a lot of fatty foods, things of that nature, okay? And then in turn, having, when I say faith, having something that fosters that good virtue so that I'll keep doing it, okay? That's that same idea of liberty, sustainable liberty, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. But that's the habits of the heart that Alexa D. Tocqueville talked about. That's, the golden triangle of freedom that the founders thought would sustain freedom, okay? So let's talk about freedom just for a moment here, okay? So if you go to slide number 23, again, I've already alluded to this, but I'll talk about it a little bit. Freedom is a two-sided coin that includes both negative freedom and positive freedom, okay? Negative freedom is freedom from outside control. Government, stay off my back, okay? Positive freedom is freedom to do what you ought to do, okay? Again, think through the runner, okay? The freedom to run a 5-minute mile or a 4-minute 30 mile, okay, is created because you're a person of virtue, okay? That's what they're talking about there. So when we're understanding freedom in America, it includes both freedom from, okay, negative freedom, freedom from government control, but also positive freedom, freedom for. What are you free for, okay? The pursuit of happiness, the pursuit of a good life, the pursuit of a life of virtue and excellence in whatever your chosen vocation is, okay? That's this idea of positive freedom, okay? And so we've got to understand that, all right? So I'm gonna stop right there.